This chat essentially epitomizes the interdisciplinary nature of this conference. So we have two incredible design leaders who have experience not only with design and tech, but with design thinking practices, and are just very familiar with the nuances of the design community in general. This is a really unique opportunity to engage and learn from perspectives of designing for both a large tech giant and for rising startups. And here's to two leaders who synthesize all these different creative disciplines in their work. So with that, the first question that I'm going to ask you guys is, how does building a strong design identity in a startup compare to remaining innovative in a large company that already has a developed identity?
Why don't you start with big kids?
All right. Okay. So, in terms of working with Google, in my current role working for search, search is actually a very established product, as we know. Google is 18 years old, and we're actually at an inflection point. So as we know, search isn't a solved product. And so the key thing here is to actually come at it with almost a startup lens and come at it through an innovation lens. And by that, I mean that using design thinking to kind of question the establishment. So what are user needs? How have they changed? Where's sharing and swiping with Gen Z, for instance? Those are the types of things that we're thinking about. But in terms of working with design in established companies, I would say that Google is a country. And so in terms of diagnosing a process for a country, it doesn't really work that way. In terms of isolating it to the team, to the product, to the maturation of the product, that's when you then apply the right process to it. So I know that's pretty high level, but for instance, to make it much more concrete, Google Express was a startup within Google, and so they had literally one designer, one UXer, supporting 30 engineers to create a proof of concept for the business, a logistics, operations-heavy business. And you take that, and you have to apply a very kind of slow design thinking process to it. And I would say that maybe a non-existent design thinking process, because at that point it's more about agility and getting product out quickly. In terms of search, we're taking a much more rigorous long-term view in the team I'm currently at. So there's tactical day-to-day launches, but there's also the ability to think long-term. And that's where we're going through much more foundational research, empathy, the kind of define, discover, design, and deliver that I would equate with kind of the more traditional design thinking process.
Right. And in startups, and this is similar to maybe Shopping Express being a startup within a big org, but in startups, what you typically have is people come up with an idea, right? They're like, oh man, we should deliver laundry using drones, right? And they have a very specific technology or very specific business pursuit that they're going to go after. And what I frequently find with companies is that they have this really narrow area of focus, and design is in this position, and particularly when you think about it from an identity perspective, like you were asking the question, and design's in this position to help them step back and look at it from a 10,000-foot view and ask the questions like, why do we get out of bed every day? What are the actual problems that we're trying to solve here? Beyond, there's a real temptation when you work on kind of identity, brand, kind of directional work to say, oh, we're trying to make the world better. Making the world better is a really broad fucking goal, right? So what you want to do is figure out kind of a big enough range of opportunity that you don't get limited to working on one very narrow kind of approach, but keep it limited enough that you're not zigzagging in a really inefficient way towards the goal that you're trying to reach. This is how a lot of startups go out of business, is they burn through a lot of money trying wildly different things, trying to make something stick to the wall. Whereas if you limit yourself reasonably to, this is why our employees get out of bed every day, this is why we founded this company, we're trying to solve this user need, because it's not a technological problem or even a business problem, it's really like something that human beings should exist in the world to make human beings' lives better. If you can help kind of define that area of opportunity, that lets you get somewhere quickly and then iterate over time. Like Google started off as a very narrow range of focus, and then over time as a brand, as a vessel, a brand is a vessel that you put meaning into, you can think of it as it adapted over time to be something much more.
Well, so within that, the next question is, how do you cultivate a design culture within either a small firm or a big firm? And both of you sort of touched upon this, but in terms of really maintaining a culture that will not only drive people to get out of bed the next day, but for years on after.
So when designers love sitting around and talking with each other about design-led businesses, and there are venture funds that are entirely predicated on the idea that designers are better founders than anyone else because we've got some genius knowledge that no one else does. And there's a real danger in this idea that a design culture is about building a great design team. Because really, if you look at it realistically, design, I work with tons of startups that don't have a single designer. There's these engineers, and they decided that they're going to take satellite imagery and look at how long the shadows are of buildings in China and measure that week over week and predict steel prices based on how much building is going on in China. There are people designing graphs in that company. They don't have a single designer. But there's design being done. Anything that shapes user experience within your business is design. And designers love to think that they hold the reins on all of this, and it's bullshit. I mean, they don't. Realistically, they absolutely don't. And so to build a great design culture in your business is about using design to work with everybody in your business to help them think like designers. And I specifically mean that they need to have empathy in how their customers, what stresses your customers have in their lives, what are you actually trying to solve for them? So whether it's a company like this that's working with macroeconomists, it's really difficult to build a business for macroeconomists if you don't understand the kinds of pressures they're under, what kinds of decisions they're making, what's going on in their lives. And design is in a position to help bring this knowledge to everybody so everybody in your organization is making better design decisions. I think that's really critical.
In terms of kind of cultivating that design culture, I see designers as facilitators to discussions for the business problem at hand. And so part of it is about framing the solutions up front. And by that, I mean rigorous analysis of the competitive landscape. So if you listen to these words, they don't sound like what a designer does, but I kid you not. It is so critical before you get started on any solution to understand who, what, even your own stakeholders within a company like Google. I mean, they have so many innate biases in their business decision that you have to kind of bring out into the conversation. So whether it's a PRD, and that's a term we use called a product requirement doc, and you will get very familiar with that, it is produced by a product manager. And what I try to do is I try to cultivate a culture in which I have my designers understand that, but also influence that if they can. And that's what I mean by early on UX strategy. Strategy can come at various points along a business or product development process, but it's really critical to get in those discussions and to build that trust with your business partner, with your engineers. Do side-by-sides. I mean, we all sit in the same office. We have amazing technologies such as video conferencing, but there will be nothing that replaces sitting together side by side discussing a problem before you even begin. And I just say that that cross-functional brain trust that's developed will show up in the end product, guaranteed.
Oh, absolutely. And this is, I find this, when I'm working with designers at the startups we're at, what I'm encouraging them to do most of the time is not to go and explain design to other people. That's one of the temptations to building design culture is I'll teach everybody what's important about building great interfaces. That's really your realm of expertise. That's fine. You can be a great interface designer. What I'd encourage you to do is go and have coffee and go have lunch with your CFO and ask your CFO, what's keeping you up at night? What stresses you out? And it turns out, your CFO or your head of HR is, maybe your head of HR is, I saw this in a startup last week. The head of HR, the most stressful thing was recruiting or retaining tech talent because the company had grown to the size where they didn't look like a startup anymore. So they were competing against the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, and they were losing great engineering talent to them. They'll never come to the design team and ask them to solve that problem because it doesn't sound like a design problem. That's absolutely a design problem. And now the design team at the startup is going off and talking to a bunch of engineers who they approached who they weren't able to close with, and now we're designing a better process for kind of bringing engineers in, doing the interview process, and then closing them. But they'll never do that unless they build empathy with kind of why they're with the engineers that they've lost. And that's a design challenge. That's a real design challenge. I think so many designers, I'm going to keep ranting. So many designers I've met, including senior, working designers today, think that their design is 90% in Sketch or Photoshop, right? They think I spend time designing, and if I'm not doing that, I'm wasting my time. I'd say that's like a quarter of your job is actually building interface and doing design work. 3/4 of your job is understanding how the fuck else everything else works in your business. Like, where does the money come from? How are we closing deals? How do we get talent into our organization? How are we making better decisions as a business? How do we see around corners so we're taking less risk or pursuing bigger opportunities where we might fall on our face? This is all design. And if you want to work at a really high level, I think you need to look that broadly at design.
Absolutely.
Ah!
Well, that was a great transition into our next question. So essentially, both of you have not only experience, as I mentioned before, designing for tech companies, but also with design thinking. So Ratna, you worked previously with Frog, and Daniel, you now work at Google Ventures, which has been instrumental in crafting the design sprint that is now being adopted by companies all across the board. So with that in mind, I'd just like to ask, how does design thinking factor into your creative problem solving, and how do you bring those methodologies into your work on a daily basis?
How do you feel about the term design thinking, Ratna?
Well, I have lots of thoughts on that. I think that it's just like innovation. It's getting a little bastardized. I think you have to be careful in figuring out. I guess on the optimistic side, I'm very happy to see it being adopted in places I never thought it would be, and that's because I believe design in its most kind of heightened state is actually what Daniel just described. It solves a variety of problems at human scale. And what that means is organizational problems, one of my favorite things, which is underneath each of the business constraints, you'll also find that actually there's a broken organization. And what you're trying to fix simultaneously are people problems. And just make a note of that. Oftentimes you can look at literally a UI, and you can see an organizational chart. And that's a problem. That means you can tell if there's redundancy, if there's friction in the user journey. You can tell, wait a minute, I don't think this product manager or this VP or both these VPs aren't really talking to each other. And so I think for me, design thinking is all-encompassing in how we work, how we approach our work together collaboratively. While it's called design thinking, I think it's all about kind of that three-legged stool, which is business, technology, design, and probably 18 other functions, especially with things like machine intelligence emerging. I would say having research scientists on board is equally important. And I would say with that research scientist, if you really have the resources to have an ethicist and kind of the community to question some of the business solutions and design solutions. So design thinking for me and the way I use it is, and actually my current role is quite central to it. Right now we're looking at the need to do the long-term thinking for search, assistant, identity, and maps. How do you integrate all these organizations that have organically grown up separately at Google? And how do you then bring those actual user experiences together? Well, that's both an organizational problem and a design problem. So what we're noticing is that by creating these horizontal teams, one of which I lead, that we can actually work with design sprints across teams and gather a variety of talent and now approach a maps problem in light of search and in light of your identity to build trust and to build a much more cohesive experience throughout. So when you get this big at Google Inc., you have to actually find innovative ways such as design sprints to really bring that kind of collaborative environment back, because people are naturally going into silos just because of sheer scale, not because of an intention not to be collaborative. So we have to do an extra hard job at it.
So I also like the idea of design thinking. I fear that we're calling everything design thinking, including just like kind of a loose way of just viewing the world as like, oh, we did design thinking, so our product must be better. And you're like, well, not necessarily. But the way I look at it, the value I see in these types of methods is that one of my colleagues said a few months ago about design sprints, he goes, I really like thinking of it as the scientific method for business. And this really resonates with me, right? Because on the one hand, I like that design can be this way of validating decisions. right? We make lots of guesses at work. We end up in these stupid meetings where we're all arguing really heatedly with each other about what our users are going to do, or what are the consequences to making a big change in our product or pursuing a new direction. And we all get hot and bothered making lots of guesses. It turns out that our guesses are frequently wrong. I've been designing for 20 years, and all I've learned is to be wrong faster. I still can't really guess what's going to happen. And so to me, design thinking is about going off, doing as much understanding as possible, making our best guess, and then measuring it as quickly as we can. And if we do that, in the context of something like a design sprint that's quite rapid, then you can get, your validation, your experiments done quite quickly, right? The typical method of working in the Bay Area is the ship early, ship often, or what's Facebook called? Move fast and break things. Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, launch and iterate.
Launch and iterate is the polite way of saying it, I guess. That's much more polite than I am. And that's fine, right? And lots of startups have had a lot of success with that. But if you look at it from an investor standpoint, where I'm going to work on an investing team, it's really slow, right? You spend 3 or 4 months making a product. If you're at a startup, you spend fucking a year doing it if you're Google. And then you put it out there and you measure and you get nice quantitative research, and sometimes it's really muddy and you don't know if you're right. In something like a sprint, like we're doing, it's about figuring out what your biggest risks and biggest opportunities are, creating a model for it. So it's very much like science. We're going to create an experiment, and then we're actually going to go validate it by using user research, right? This gives you at least directional support for making big bets. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, and a lot of potential for business designers to work across the business, not just on product decisions and design decisions, but across like broad business decisions to add a lot more certainty to companies. To me, that's the biggest opportunity for design in the next decade, probably.
Sounds great. Well, I think we'll move into my final question before we move into open Q&A. So what do you define as good design, and what do you define as bad design?
Small question.
So I think good design is obviously something that feels very intuitive and is usable from a very kind of clean-cut answer. But I think that actually good design, when you get deep into it, and you've been kind of immersed in that world for about 20 years, is you can literally see the blood, sweat, and tears, and you can see a highly functioning team in that design. And this is a very biased opinion of someone that's been living in this world. But I mean, I see it so clearly. You can see the kind of the team synergy. You're like, wow, this is so fluid. This is just works. There's cohesion between the marketing effort and the business effort, and how they've thought through and choreographed the experience end to end. And so we've heard of these terms called experience mapping, and those are great. And actually some people that try to use design thinking quickly might retroactively do some of those kind of use those approaches. But when you're starting out, especially like when you're starting out as a startup or a smaller company, it can be in the DNA of your product. And I think that's when the real beauty is there, is that balance. Is there's a shared vision amongst all disciplines, and there's diversity of thought that a user can feel, and that user can be like run the gamut and range from all types of user archetypes. So that's when I call when something really connects with you, offers you meaning, and also actually enhances and transforms your life. It's usually the reflection of a high functioning team.
So when I think of good versus bad design, there's a quote that I came across probably 10 years ago. It's from the Shakers, so the sect of the Quakers, where they're really famous for making very simple, beautiful furniture. And the quote says something like, don't make anything unless it's necessary, but if it's necessary, don't hesitate to make it beautiful. And so when I think about design, I think primarily be concerned with whether this is necessary. Are we fundamentally building the right thing? Are we designing the right thing? Are we implementing something, process in our business that's actually important and will actually improve anything for the right people for the right reasons? Focus on that primarily. Once you've decided that this is actually a good bet to make, this is something we should do, and is necessary, execute it as best you can in the way that Ratna is saying. I think a lot of that has to do with having the right team in place, but make something as intuitive and as functional and as that something will fit seamlessly into your customers' lives, that's super, super important. And beyond that, aesthetics is a whole other argument. But
Sounds good. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello, everyone. Or guys. Anyway, my question is particularly in terms of like actually doing user research. Basically, the question in its simplest form is just how do you ask the right questions that actually get towards what you actually want or need to know in terms of your design process?
So first, you want to just do desk research just to understand the space, right? You look at the competitors, but you also look at kind of cultural behaviors. So what is the backdrop of our culture? You also then want to look at analogous industries. And this is where, in just some of the breakouts, I've talked to a few of you, and what I'm really interested in are people studying various fields, right? So together, simultaneously, double majors, triple majors, whatever. Get your hands on every type of class you can that, develops a bit of contrast in your brain and your mindset. And so in terms of that of research, your starting point is really cast the net wide and then start talking to your internal stakeholders, subject matter experts, and then as you're doing this, actively synthesize the data. So this is where we, have one method called affinity mapping, whatever it is. But the thing is that active practice, literally day to day, will create that team synergy I referred to earlier. And then you get into the more formalized design research, such as both either if it's generative or evaluative. So generative or foundational research at the beginning to understand, like, are these the people we want to design for? What are their concerns around, let's say, media? How do they interact with media? What are they looking for that current products don't provide? And then sourcing the appropriate participant mix and all that, and then coming up with your research plan and methodology. And that's when you really start kind of collaborating with the experts, depending on how scrappy you want to be with the research or how rigorous you want to be, because there's all flavors of it. The thing is that once you start doing it, you'll have your own practice, and it's really an amazing starting point to just get fully immersed. And then from there, you obviously start gaining those insights, and then you can concept and then do some evaluative usability research at the end. And so then people really feel like they have an understanding of, oh, I thought this was going to work, and actually it doesn't for these very clear reasons. I'm also a big fan of conjoint analysis and combination of quant and qual. I do not like quant research on its own. I don't think it really gets at the why. Ethnographic research is phenomenal if you have the budget for it. Living and breathing with your participants and understanding how they live and use products, there's nothing like it. And I say bring the executives onto those research trips because they'll never forget how the user feels, right?